Um, for anyone who hasn't been before, my name's Kim Barnetson. I'm a childminder in Colchester, and I'm also the childminding lead for the Stronger Practice Hub. So we do webinars a couple of times a month on all different subjects to help us share best practice and get involved. I'm just having a quick look at the chat. Um, oh, okay. Hi, Kathy. That's all right. We won't call you Mark. That's fine. Hello, everybody. So today we're going to talk about schemas. I'll be showing my PowerPoint, and so I won't be able to see the chat. So I'm going to ask Damon to keep an eye on that for me, and then we can carry on with the PowerPoint. But feel free to, if you've got any comments, I have left space at the end for comments, but if you've got comments or you want to just say something, either just unmute yourself and shout out or put something in the chat, whatever works for you, best for you, or, put your camera on. I'm happy to just go with whatever works. I'm going to just share my screen. And sorry, you can probably see my next PowerPoint waiting to be done there for next time. Right, let me minimize that. So tonight we're talking about schemas, and here we are. We are the Stronger Practice Hub, as you know. So I'm Kim. Lisa's going to be joining us as well. And we also have Damon, who's our IT handler. There we go. Schemas. I chose this picture on purpose because I think it sort of goes with the idea of making connections. So some of you might already know what a schema is, but we're going to explain it. I'm just waiting for my screen to change. Bear with me. Here we go. This is our agenda for this evening. So we're going to explain what is a schema. We're going to talk about types of schemas, and then we're going to have a think about realistically what do these schemas look like in our everyday observations when we see children doing things in our settings. Then, once we've recognised a child is exhibiting a schema, how do we support those children? And then I've left some space at the end where we can have a little bit of a community of practice and share ideas and best practice with each other. And fingers crossed, the Slido is working tonight. So I've got a Slido set up as well, where you can all contribute. So let's get started. What do we mean by schemas? So this is a quote by Chris Athy. Schemas are his big thing, her big thing, sorry. And schemas are patterns of repeated behaviours and actions that young children use to build knowledge, and it enables children to make sense of and predict their world. This is such a great quote because that's exactly what schemas are. There's like an experiment. You and I both know that if we, let's say, drop something on the floor, it will either bounce or break. But young children don't know that. And the way they find that out is by trying it out with lots of different things. I threw a ball on the floor, that bounced. What happens if I throw this china cup on the floor? What happens if I throw a teddy bear on the floor? So schemas are a way of building up this bank of knowledge that is stored for later use, so that you and I don't have to think, I wonder what's going to happen if I drop that ball on the floor. We already know because we've already got this bank of knowledge in our heads. And that's basically what a schema is. It's a way of constructing knowledge to store it for later on to help us predict. Humans are hardwired for predicting patterns and for making patterns and looking for patterns in their world. And that helps us to work out what's going to happen next. If I step off a ladder, I might fall. I know that because it's happened before, or I've seen it happen before. I've already got that knowledge. I don't have to learn it firsthand again. Now, there are lots of different types of schemas. And if you do a Google search, you'll come up with loads. And it seems to be getting more and more all the time. I really don't want anyone to get hung up on particular types of schemas. It's really not massively important to get hung up on the terminology. But I've just picked the most popular.
39 participants. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, Oh, they've got assembling now. That's a new
They've got
schema.
more. Okay.
Assembling.
So we've got trajectory,
Schema.
enveloping, enclosing, transporting.
Sorry, Kim,
Um,
I put you on mute by accident.
no,
Sorry.
that's all right. No, don't worry. Positioning, and I did put assembling in there, as someone was just saying. Do you know, when I looked deeper into it, assembling really just means piling things up, keeping piles of things, either neat piles or messy piles. That could go for pretty much any child, couldn't it? So, but the ones we've usually heard of, the ones we're sort of mostly working with are trajectory, where children want to throw things, enveloping, where things are covered up, enclosing, which is very similar, or putting yourself in a small space, transporting, massive schema for a lot of children, and rotation and connecting and positioning, I would say, are your main ones, really. Now let's have a look when my thing moves on. Come on, computer. Oh dear, sorry, bear with me. I think I've got stuck. Hold on, I'm going to stop sharing and then share again. Is there a question in the meantime? Oh, no, it's okay.
No, no questions yet.
I don't know why that got stuck, so sorry about that. Let's try again. I don't know, sometimes it's just a little bit slow when you're sharing it rather than if you're just at home watching it yourself. Ah, right, okay, now let's see if we can get past this page. Hooray. So let's have a look. What might schemas look like in everyday play? So trajectory just basically means what happens when something is going through the air, doesn't it? So this can be throwing things, rolling things, jumping, dropping things, as we were just saying. And it's not just things themselves as well. Enveloping is basically covering objects or themselves in something. Paint, dough, fabric, or covering objects. You know, you quite often get children, don't you, put an object inside dough and then roll it round and then have to unpeel it and sort of discover what's inside. Or they might wrap something up in a piece of fabric, or wrap themselves in a piece of fabric. And in this picture here, there is actually a child in that picture. She looks like she's camouflaged. This is one of my grandchildren actually covering herself in paint at my house. So that's enveloping and trajectory. Then we've got enclosure. So that could be putting themselves or putting objects inside things. So boxes, baskets, small spaces. We've all seen children, haven't we? Like cats trying to squeeze into tiny little things. They'll sit in tiny boxes, they'll squeeze themselves into baskets, they'll squeeze themselves into little spaces. Some of that is a schema, some of that is also discovering what they can do with their bodies and their feeling where their body is in space, you know, squashing themselves in. Transporting, again, pretty much says what it does on the tin, really, doesn't it? Transporting. I'm sure we have all seen in our settings children, especially when you think they're involved in role play, walking around perhaps with a doll buggy that is loaded with random objects that they've collected and they're moving them from one place to another. That's a type of schema. So transporting in whatever type of container they want to. I've got buggies and wheelbarrows here. It can be in bags, it can be in boxes that they're shoving along the floor. Children will find ways to transport anything. This is why containers are really, really an important resource. Rotational. Here we're thinking about rolling, spinning, watching washing machines go round. You know, very young children especially really love that, don't they? But also themselves, not just objects. So that could be going on those swings that are like bird's nest swings, they're called, that you get at the parks. You get several children on them and they spin round. At a park near us, we have a thing called a washing, well, we call it the washing machine. It's like a metal drum that it's in a frame, children get in it, and then the adult spins it round for them. I mean, not my idea of fun, but it's perfect for a child with a rotational schema. Anything to do with things going round and round like that is rotational schema. And then you've got the connecting schema. Again, pretty much says what it does on the tin. It's joining things together. So in this picture, she's using tape to join odd random loose bits together. It can be tying string around something and then looping it all around the setting, joining up different things, putting it on door handles. It can be joining things together with glue. It can be things as simple as the wooden train tracks that we all have, or Lego. So all of these things are sort of things we're seeing all the time. And then we've got a couple more. Positioning. By the way, I should have said thank you to everyone who sent me some pictures to use as well. It's really helpful. Positioning just really means arranging objects to make shapes and patterns. So this is from a recent network session. And you can see a child has put these objects together in a pattern or a shape that means something to them. It doesn't have to be an actual shape, triangle or a circle or something. It can just be an arrangement of shapes in whatever fashion the child wants to have them. And then we've got orientation. That's things like, you're looking at things upside down, you're hanging off things, you're just looking at the world in a different way. And I think I might have taken the assembling one off because it was just making piles of things. And I've included transforming, which is combining materials to create new textures or colours. Again, something we see all the time, don't we? All the time. It can be in play cooking here. It can be, in the mud pit, it can be the sand. It can be at the beach when you're mixing sand and water together. It can be water and soap. It can be mixing paints together. It can be painting on clay. It can be putting paint on something else. It can be painting themselves. All sorts of different mixing things together.
Supposed to be on a
Now,
when I went in for work. I got.
Oh,
I knew it was.
I'm really sorry. Can someone you better just mute your phone for a moment, please? Thank you. So as I said before, I don't want you to get hung up on types of schemas because that is really not, whether a child has a rotational schema or a trajectory schema is not the thing. The thing to remember is that we know that child, to be able to recognize it, we know that child has a schema or is exhibiting a schema and that we're able to support it. So yeah, don't get hung up on the terminology at all. One thing I really want to make clear, for anyone who's not familiar with schemas, is that schemas can be very subtle. Sometimes you hardly notice them at all. They can be all-consuming, where that is all the child wants to do all the time. Let's say it's a rotational schema. All the child wants to do is rotational scheming things because they're building up that store of knowledge, and they'll keep going with it. With any schema, the child keeps going with it until their brain says, stop, you've got enough of that knowledge now. I don't need to know anything else about rotational objects. Now I need to know about transforming. And then they'll start on something else and the brain will work their way through that. So sometimes they're massive, all-consuming schemas and really, really obvious. They can last a really long time or they can be over quite quickly. Again, it all depends how quickly the brain takes in the amount of knowledge it needs. They can overlap or be combined. So I chose this picture on purpose because there's several different schema things going on in this picture. There's transporting because the children had to move all of these things to build this den. There's transforming because the children had mixed up in that bowl on the top some sand, some leaves and some water. And there is an enclosure as well because they're underneath inside the enclosure. So it's a little bit of everything all combined together in that schema, isn't it? So for me to just say, oh, that child clearly has a whatever schema, wouldn't really do justice to the actually what I'm observing. I'm observing a lot of schematic play overlapping and mixed together. So the key is to be able to recognize when the child is exhibiting schematic behavior and provide resources and experience that support it. So if you've got a child that you really know has a strong trajectory schema, you might want to go out to the park with a load of things that they can throw. Or you might want to find a playground for a child with a rotational schema that's got really good roundabouts, or the washing machine type play area that I was talking about, because children really have this drive, this innate drive to discover these things, and it's so satisfying for them when their brain can build this knowledge. But this is also really where I would argue where loose parts and an enabling dynamic environment really come into their own, because children don't need fancy things to support their schemas. They need to be able to look around them in their environment and use what they see. Because then on the other, as well as all the schema stuff, it's also supporting critical thinking and all that type of lovely knowledge that we want children to have, hasn't it? So let's see what we've got. I've got a couple of pictures just to demonstrate how incredibly simple it is to support schemas. So this one is from Marion, and this child has a rotational schema. He just wants to play with hoops. In this case, he's putting hoops on the mug tree, but then he might take them off and thread them onto something else, or roll them along something, or put them on the floor and draw around them, or thread them on his arm. He can do what he wants with these resources because they're not closed. He's not being told what to do with them. His schema is leading the play. And I've got another one, there was just a couple of quick pictures. So this child has a trajectory schema. I took a couple of pictures of her last week, but I've just used one on here. So she started off at the top of the slide with a couple of little cars and was putting them down the slide, and it was really good fun. She was absolutely loving it. Then she moved on to putting balls down the slide, and then she moved on to putting great big dumper trucks down the slide, and then she went on to putting teddy bears down the slide. All of those things behave differently on the slide. So
Good mum.
Sorry? Okay, sorry. The tiny cars go really fast. They zoom off. It's a curly slide. They zoom off the curly slide and fly off across the garden. The balls roll down quite nicely and satisfactorily and end at the bottom of the slide. The dumper trucks just went crazy and turned over and were just all behaving strangely. And the teddy bears weren't slippery enough and got stuck on the slide. Now, all of those things were telling her, this is what happens when I put this thing down the slide. When I put the cars down, this happens. When I put the balls down, this happens. When I put the teddy bears down, this happens. Her brain is storing all of that information for later use so that she doesn't have to experiment all over again to know what's going to happen. She'll be able to predict what would happen if I put this object down the slide. That's basically what a schema is. It's just building this store of knowledge, of repeating an experiment with one variable, if you want to look at it in scientific terms. So the experiment is the same, but you're changing one thing each time. Or you're, if it's yourself with your body, you might be rolling around on top of a yoga ball or something like that one day, or then the next day you might be on a swing going round and around. But you're changing it up slightly because it's similar but not exactly the same. So your brain stores the differences for each time you do this sort of experiment. Now, I know sometimes from parents you get questions, don't you, about my child's always lining things up. Should I be worried? Well, generally, no, you shouldn't. This is just a perfectly normal way of the brain constructing knowledge. Sometimes I think it is the lining up. It's the positioning schema that causes the most issues, isn't it? Because you might have a child that has a very strong positioning schema or linear schema. Everything's lined up. So they're lining up cars, and then they're lining up cups, and then they're lining up books, or whatever it is, they're lining them up. And they're again working their way through that cognitive development. Yes, some children with ASD do have linear schemas just as other children do, or they do have rotational schemas or whatever it is. But that is still part of just normal development. The thing is, if you have a parent that's concerned about that, generally speaking, I'm sure we all know that if you have concerns about a child, it's not just whether they're lining up cars a lot. There are other behaviours that go alongside that, and I'm sure all of you are familiar with that type of thing. So don't let parents panic if their child spends all their time laying on the floor, lining up their cars. I mean, it's just part of normal behaviour. Unless you have more than one thing to be concerned about, I really wouldn't worry, and I would reassure them. And in fact, what we really need to do is not worry about that behaviour, but really support it. So I'm hoping the Slido is going to work. If you've got your phones with you, you can zap the QR code there and answer the question, which is, what are your best resources to support schemas? Thinking back to that picture we saw of the child where they'd built the den, and they were transforming sand with things and putting that on the top. And that was exhibiting several different schemas, wasn't it? Think back to that and yes, thank you. And and pop in what you use that you think, or what you have that children really can use to support schemas. Yeah, loose parts, Lego, yeah. Even though Lego is a manufactured toy, it's one of the best loose parts you can have as well, as long as you're not forcing children to only build certain things or not mix bits up or anything like that. I'm really glad that the Slido's working. It abandoned us for months. Have we got any others? Oh, coloured scarves, perfect. Yes, it's exactly what they're using in that. Duplo, yes, very similar to Lego, isn't it? Spare wheels, yes, very good. Tents, yeah, or I mean, tents are great, but sometimes being able to build your own tent or den is even more sort of supportive of development. Yeah, wooden rings, yeah, perfect, like we saw in that picture. Bags, baskets, masking tape, yes, brilliant. I have a little anecdote here about, I had a child a few years ago, probably about 10 years ago now, when I had an Ofsted inspection, who was exhibiting a really, really strong connecting schema. I mean, it went on for ages and ages. And on the day that we had our Ofsted inspection, it was when inspectors used to just sit at the table and look at your paperwork. He used 3 rolls of electric tape to wrap around the Ofsted inspector's chair and tape it to the table. And we had to cut it off afterwards. And when we left it, she could get out. She thought it was absolutely fantastic, actually, because she could really see that we were letting him just go for it. He wanted to do this connecting, and he was driven by it. This is a really good point down the bottom. Thank you. It does depend on what the schema is. Yeah, that's exactly right. I think the key is, if you've got loose parts, open-ended resources, I'm sure anyone that's been on any of these webinars has I can see a bit of a pattern emerging here that really, I'm really all about using loose parts as much as possible. They are just such valuable resources, because if you've got a really enabling environment that has lots of loose parts, that the children can access fabric and pegs and string and logs and crates and wooden rings and scarves and cardboard boxes and Lego and whatever else you've got, they can use those in the way that their brain is telling them to experiment. So we can, along as we do with all other types of development, we can recognize it, we can enable it, we can support it, but we have to really let the children lead their own exploration, don't we? So I would say always the best type of learning for children is child-led but adult-enabled. So let's say, for instance, you see a child in your setting. So you're quite right, it does depend on what type of schema they've got. And you might think that child really wants to envelop things. They really want to. They keep taking out all the tea towels out of the drawer and wrapping things up. Then you might think, next time I'm at the charity shop, I'm going to have a look for some nice scarves. And then that's your job. You've supported those schemas, that schema. And if you see a child who really wants to squeeze into boxes and things like that, you might ask around with your families, if you've got any cardboard boxes or anything like that, can you send them over here because they really want to play with them? And then you're enabling that schema. You're supporting it. It's as simple as that. You don't need to really think more than just, I can see what that child is doing. I wonder how I can support them to carry on with this experimentation. Like the child on the slide with the different objects, you know, those other objects were around for her to put down the slide. She might have carried on with that later on in the day, mightn't she? She might have put Lego down the slide, or she might have put pots and pans down the slide, or pieces of fabric. She could have, because it's open for her to choose what she wants to do. And that really extends their learning. If we're not enabling it, we're stopping it, you know. And we really want children to keep going, keep experimenting, experiment with this schema until your brain says, stop, we have enough information. I don't need to know anything more about what goes down the slide. I already know enough. You know, your brain has got all that information. It's funny because when we think about it, we've done all these things as children too. That's why we know. We know what will happen if we roll something down a hill. We know what will happen if we drop something. We don't have to do it because we already know, don't we? Thank you so much for putting some things on the Slido. I'm going to let you just carry on for a couple of minutes, and I think I've got a couple more slides, and then we can have some questions and answers. Let's have a look. What haven't we included so far? Cork, sticks, foil, rolls, shells, yeah, boxes. I'm a big fan of baskets. I absolutely love baskets for all sorts of reasons, particularly for transporting, because it's such a strong thing in a lot of children, isn't it? And we might see it in role play, as I was saying about pushing the buggy around. You might think, oh, they're playing going on holiday or going to the shops, but they're also piling things up. I had a child in my setting once, quite a while ago now, who'd come from a very traumatic background. And part of her healing from that was storing things and transporting things to what she considered to be a safe place. So this wasn't quite a schema, but it was very easy to support that and let her work her way through that until she felt safe, because she just carried things around in baskets the whole time. She'd come from a background where things were taken away, and she didn't know when she was going to have another toy or another even food. Actually, she used to add food to her collections, and all her special things. And part of my job as her practitioner, as her carer, was to not move those things. So she used to have a space where she could put them. It was behind the sofa. She could put whatever she liked there, and she knew I wouldn't touch it. We knew that she would come home and it would be there, and you'd come back the next day and it would be there. Eventually, she felt safe and we could start moving those things away. I've also had children who have been really into piling up books. And again, that's great. Pile up as many books as you like, as long as it was safe and wasn't going to crush some poor baby. I left it there because that was their experiment. And it's not my job to dismantle someone else's experiment when they're halfway through it. So thank you. I'm loving all these things on here. Yeah. Big tires, small tires. Yeah, these are all things that actually are pretty cheap, aren't they? And they're so valuable as loose parts. I don't know how many of you came to my Enabling Environments webinar, but I'm going to revisit that because I feel like we've had a year or so now where we've gone over similar types of things all the time. And I think it might be really helpful to revisit that and see how do we feel about an enabling environment now, looking back on what we've learned over the last year or so. Let's have a look. Crates, pallets. Yeah, crates are great, aren't they? And you can buy them. I got one from our local co-op and another couple from the milkman, actually. If you have a milkman, like I do, ask them if they're very nice about it usually, or you could buy them. But yeah, a lot of these things you can have for free. You can ask your parents for them. It's not expensive. It's not difficult. And yet it's there's such rich resources for children. You're really supporting their development with these things.
Kim, just while you pause there, we've had a question asked you from Lorna saying, is emptying, is that a trajectory schema?
I guess it would depend, wouldn't it? Well, they're just pouring things out of things, like tipping up a box and just tipping it all on the floor.
Yes, that's exactly what they're doing. They just like emptying stuff.
Yeah, they could.
I think it might be them watching it falling.
Yeah, because everything works differently, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Sorry, Lorna, while you're saying that, my thing got stuck again, so I'm just moving forward a little bit. Yes, I think, like I said about don't get too hung up on what type of schema it is, because they overlap so much. Children's brains are so clever, aren't they? They're doing more than one thing at once. So yeah, if that's a repeated pattern of behavior, then yeah, let's call it a schema. It doesn't really matter if it's a trajectory or not, but
just provide resources for them to do that.
Sorry, Lorna, say that to me again. Just
provide resources for them to do it.
Oh, yeah. Just provide the baskets and the loose parts or the containers. So, that can be I don't know, little wooden bowls or buckets or whatever, and just let them decide what they want to go in there and tip it back out again, rather than controlling. I mean, I know Lorna, you're such a brilliant practitioner, so I know you already know this, but we mustn't control what they do, what they put in there. If you don't want to put your best china ornaments in there, obviously keep those out of the way. But if there's anything else in your setting that they can go around and think, oh, what happens if I tip the shells out? Oh, that happened. That made a really good noise. Now what happens if I put all the necklaces in this other thing and tip that out? So yeah, you're right. It's just a type of a repeated pattern of behaviour.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So you know, Lorna, you know exactly what you're doing.
Sorry, just
Kim, sorry.
Yeah.
So there's been another question. Is ripping paper or ripping papers, is that a schema?
It can be. Is it a repeated pattern of behaviour? Then yes, call it a schema. I guess it's quite hard to label some of these behaviours. That's why I really don't want people to get hung up on trajectory, on terminology. I don't know if we had to think of a label for it. Transforming, it was one thing and now it's something else. But it can be deconstructing, can't it, as well? So I wouldn't worry about getting hung up on the different types of schema. I just really felt I had to include that so we could see what we mean sometimes by those different types. But really, all we need to think is this child exhibiting a repeated pattern of behaviour? If so, how can I support it? That's super easy. Provide lots of bits of old paper. That's the easiest thing to support ever, isn't it, really? And I know Ofsted are really keen on asking about schemas, aren't they? How do you support schemas? How do you do this? How do you do that? You can say, it's a repeated pattern of behaviour. That these schemas are overlapping and combined and complicated. And so to just pick it out and say that child only has this schema narrows it down a little bit too much. So, if an inspector came to me, I would say, I can see this child has got several schemas going on. I support them by making sure, they've got plenty of open-ended resources that they can use to explore that learning with. Also, it might be like going outside or doing something in particular, rolling down a hill. For a child with a rotational schema, if you say to Ofsted, well, I know this child's got a rotational schema, and so we go out to the biggest hill we can find and we just spend the morning rolling down the hill. I mean, that is an amazingly brilliant way to support a child with that type of schema. And yeah, if you recognize, so you've obviously recognized that child's got a repeated pattern of behavior, they want to rip paper, they're obviously getting some reward, cognitive reward from that, aren't they? And just go with it. I would say just go with it. Gather up all the bits of paper.
Hello.
I think we've lost Kim for a minute. I'm just going to try and reconnect her. Apologies for that. I'm just going to call her and tell her to leave, and we'll be able to resume very shortly.
Hi, I should be back. Am I
Back.
back?
Yes, we can hear
Oh,
you.
God.
I don't know what
That's
happened
the
there.
first time that's ever happened
No,
mid-presentation, isn't it?
it wasn't me,
Okay,
honestly.
let me just get back to where I was with this last screen. So sorry about that, everyone. Um, Before we start having a chat, I'll just go over this last screen that I probably tell me how far I got with this. Had I started talking about it, or was I talking about ripping paper?
So we're just talking about ripping paper, and then you disappeared.
Okay, you missed all the interesting bit. Okay, so as you were saying about the ripping paper, yeah, don't get hung up on what type of schema it is. If it's a repeated pattern of behavior, that's what matters. If you recognize a repeated pattern of behavior and you support it by providing resources, in this case, lots of bits of paper, then you're supporting that child's schema. I was talking about Ofsted. Did I get cut off or had I said that?
You mentioned about talking to the inspector.
Right, thank you. I'm glad you're paying
What did you say?
attention, Dave.
Yeah.
All I was saying was just to summarize about that is that an inspector might ask, how do you support children with schemas? Again, don't get hung up on the type of schema. Just say, I recognize when a child has a repeated pattern of behavior, and this is how I support it. I provide resources, I provide experiences, depending on that child. I would definitely say you don't need to plan activities for, especially group activities, because not every child has the same schema, and they're overlapping, and different things are going on all the time. So as it says in the EYFS, children are learning best when they're leading their own learning. So have a think about that the children in your setting, recognizing what they need from you to support these experiments that their brains are doing. Is it that you've got a child who likes transforming and they really want to just mix stuff together all the time? Okay, enable that. What can I do to enable it? Oh, I know. I'll make sure we've got herbs. I'll make sure we've got bowls. I'll make sure we've got spoons. I'll make sure we've got jugs. I'll make sure they've got access to some water. I might add some flowers. I might uh, put things in like sieves or something like that, just to mix it up a little. Excuse the pun, mix it up a little bit. So that's all you need to do. That is it. It's very, very simple. It's all about just knowing the child really well. I know you all know your children really well. I can tell by the questions you ask and the comments you make and things like the Slido. I know that you know all these things. But sometimes it's just good to sort of think about, oh yeah, that is what I'm doing already. I am doing these things. So yeah, in summary, if you're working with the child's best interests, yeah. Sorry, were you going to say something?
Sorry, I was going to say had a couple of comments while you were talking.
Oh,
Then we've
okay.
got
Let me
someone
stop
said about
sharing.
that they introduced balls made of old socks as a freely available alternative to other things that were being thrown around. We
Yeah.
didn't dictate that they get used, but they were more friendly to those around if they got hit rather than a flying car or a brick. And they've been used in lots of different ways.
Ah, That's brilliant. That's a really good,
Interesting
easy,
start,
quick
yeah.
resource to use, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
brilliant.
someone else has said, I have a child that loves to continuously repeat phrases. Would this be a schema? And if so, how could I support this? Would it be just joining in with the phrases and repeating these back to him?
I'm not
Mm.
sure if I would call that a schema, to be fair, because what is the child learning from that? Are they repeating the phrase but changing something every time? Are they rhyming words together or making sounds? You know, are they changing it up? This is what we want to see from a schema, is that you're not you're repeating the pattern of behavior, but you're altering it slightly each time so that your brain can work out what happens when I do this, what happens when I add that to it. I mean, the example of the child on the slide is quite an easy one to go with. What happens when I roll a ball? What happens when I roll a teddy? Does the same thing happen when I roll a car? You know, so I'm not sure that repeating phrases perhaps is a schema. Lisa, what would you think about that? Sorry to make you jump in.
No, not. I wouldn't say phrases. They're behaviours.
Mm.
Like exactly what you've said, Kim. Like that repeated pattern of behaviour. But they,
Yeah,
you know, you might find that they start off. So like we're doing the rotation schema, they might start off with hoops and stuff, and then you might find them moving around in a circle around something. So they and that's how they build on that
yeah,
schema. But yeah, phrases. I mean, almost repetition of phrases is kind of rote learning, really.
yeah. I think I'd be interested to know a little bit more about how does that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I
it's the
mean that's
way
a
language is processed. I suppose it's if they're learning phrases from I don't know, from things that they watch online or something like that, and they're
yeah.
starting to use those phrases. That is a form of rote learning. It could be a form of just out language processing.
Yes, this is what I was thinking, because sometimes children that are using Gestalt are using a phrase almost as a replacement for a word that they might need. You know, they might repeat a certain phrase all the time, mightn't they, rather than coming up with new language.
It's often out of context as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Someone's mentioned, Debs has mentioned about the reference to Gestalt learning processing, which we've obviously covered in one of our webinars that Becky, the
Yeah,
speech and language therapist, did, and about how a child uses a phrase to mean something.
yeah,
But yeah, so I can't remember who it was who said
yeah. Deb just said that
Natasha.
on it.
Yeah, and
I, Deb,
Natasha's the one who asked the question, but it might be worth having a look at that. That's on YouTube. It's called, I think it's called the Gestalt learning process. Might be worth having a look at that,
Was it
possibly.
just out on echolalia, Damon?
Yes, yeah, linked to that, yeah.
Yeah.
So where they
I,
use a phrase to mean something, so it might be that they're happy or about something, or something's they're not happy or whatever, they want something. But and it might be that, it might not be, but it might be worth looking at that video. But and Natasha said thank you that she'll take a look, so that's good.
oh, hold on. Yeah, Debs, I think you're exactly right on that. I think that's not what we're thinking of when we're thinking of a schema. Generally thinking of a behaviour um, that's building some sort of knowledge for the child. So, have we got any questions or anything that anyone wants to chat about? Have you? I'd be really interested in knowing if anyone's got a child in their setting at the moment that has a particularly strong um, schema, and how you're supporting that, how you've recognised it, and how you're supporting it. As we said, sometimes, like Lisa said, they start off quite small, going round and round in circles, spinning round and round in circles. Um, and I think the really good thing about having open-ended resources is that you don't have to. It's not that you don't have to recognise it, but the resources are already there. You know, so you know the child has got those resources all ready to start the experiment, and you can just add to them if you feel you need to, like the amazing balls that you were saying about the sock balls, which is such a great idea. I don't seem to have any messages, I'm afraid, apart from Natasha's. Must be something to do
I've
with
got
me
one
getting
from
it.
Julia.
Yeah.
who says hoops. One child loves a hoop, so we provide different size hoops for them to spin.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah. So that child's probably got a rotational schema. So different size hoops are great. And then maybe to enable that, you might want to just add other circular objects or go somewhere with the hoops that you can do something with them, maybe, take the hoops out to the hill and roll the hoops down the hill or something like that. Um, I have a child who's obsessed with connecting, so I provide lots of blocks like Duplo, magnetic tiles, road pieces to connect together. That is lovely, Kirsty. Perfect, perfect, perfect. And then you can extend that further by making sure there's things like tape and string and things like that available to them so that they can move on from that part of their schema to other parts, sort of extend it a little bit more. But you're doing it, that sounds fantastic, lovely. Rachel, getting into small spaces, sitting in baskets, squeezing into shells and IKEA cubes, behind tables, under tables. Yeah, I mean, the children they just love that. Providing boxes of different sizes, providing spaces child is able to squeeze into. Some spaces too big, some too small to support learning with trial and error. Yeah, that's great. And actually, I think sometimes that squeezing into small spaces, it can be a schema, but it can also be that they're just working out their body in space, working out where their body fits into space. And that's, you're enabling that absolutely 100% perfectly. So well done. And it wasn't difficult, was it, Rachel? You didn't have to go out and spend lots of money. You didn't have to set up particular activities. All you had to do was put a couple of extra boxes in your setting. It's as simple as that. This is what I mean. I know you're all doing it. When I was writing it, I was thinking, well, everyone's doing this already anyway. But I do think sometimes people get a bit thrown by that terminology of schemas. And that's why I really don't want you to get too hung up on it. It doesn't matter whether the schema is trajectory or enclosing or transforming. What matters is that you've seen what the child is doing, you've recognized it, and you're supporting it. And exactly as Rachel's saying here, simple as putting a couple of boxes in your setting, or going to the charity shop and picking up a few baskets. If you've got a child that really likes transforming, find a couple of old suitcases or whatever it is. Or like in Rachel's case, she's obviously just cleared out a little bit of space on her IKEA unit. That's even easier, isn't it? Yeah, balls. Yeah, lovely. Yeah, that's really good, Bushra. Yeah, I agree. So if you've got a child that's particularly interested in that, also things like putting things into, like, putting the balls into muffin trays or whatever, is quite good for positioning because children quite like arranging things like that, don't they? Yeah, these are all brilliant. You can talk to me, if anyone wants to. I don't mind reading the chat, but I'm very happy to talk. Lorna sometimes comes on and chats to
Yeah,
me.
come on, Lorna, share
Yeah, come on.
something.
It's just me. It's just I'm just a normal childminder like the rest of you.
Hi Kim, it's Lorna.
Hi.
I've
Hi,
just
Lorna.
asked, do all children have schemas?
Well, in
Just
theory, yes, but they can be very, very subtle because that's how the brain works out, makes this store of knowledge. But they're not always like all encompassing. All they want to do is work on that schema. They can sometimes be very subtle.
that's what I thought, and I've noticed recently that, well, it might just be the cohort they have. The boys have stronger schemas, where the girls have are more subtle schemas.
Mm.
I mean, the girls want to play with dolls and babies, and play mum and feed them a lot of the time. And the boys have more distinct schemas.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose we could probably look at research into genders and see whether genders have different types of schemas or different strengths of schemas. In my own experience, when I think back, the children I've had with the strongest schemas are boys. and I don't really know. I don't really know why that is. It might
No.
just be that.
It's
I mean,
just something that I've noticed.
yeah.
I can identify schemas in boys.
Mm,
Well, obviously there are some girls that have really strong, but the
yeah.
girls seem to be a little more subtle in their schemas, and you
Yeah.
have to. I mean, but at the end of the day, I think it's about um, providing resources for what they're interested in and where they're going, which is what we do
Yeah.
all the time,
You,
scaffolding what they
you've
need.
hit, as always, Lorna, you've hit the nail on the head. That is exactly right. If we just, if we didn't know about schemas, but we were still supporting children, recognizing that they're doing something and supporting them by providing the right resources and an enabling environment and a responsive adult, then we're doing it anyway. So children will build their knowledge in any way they can, won't they? It might just be that the girls in your cohort at the moment, like say, have got very subtle schemas, or they've already amassed enough knowledge that they need for certain things. We do know, don't we, that boys, especially preschool boys, sort of 3 and 4 year olds, they get a testosterone rush, which can sometimes mean that they need their behavior tends to be a little bit more boisterous. So that can maybe have something to do with that, I suppose. Whereas in a girl, I really hate to genderize, so I'm just saying, for instance, a child that hasn't got that might display a schema in a much more subtle way than a child who wants to throw themselves off a climbing frame as a part of their trajectory schema. See what I mean? I don't know if that's true. I'm just, it's a bit of a, I'm just sort of taking a bit of a stab in the dark about it because, but I agree. I don't know if other people have found the same, but I definitely have noticed that I've had children in the past who've had very, very strong schemas, and they've been sort of 3 and 4 year old boys. But I have had girls, and I have got girls at the moment with schemas. So yeah, I guess it's all down to the individual child, isn't it?
It's just
Um,
following what they need.
yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Following what they need, providing what they need to extend whatever they're learning. Let them lead their learning with you observing, recognizing what they need, and putting things in place to extend it, and then you're covering everything. But I do know that people do panic a little bit about it with Ofsted, but it's really very simple. Can you kickstart or sort of broke schemas in a child, or does it have to be natural? No, it has to. I would say it has to be natural, because it's come from the brain. The brain is uh, building that development,
So
but you can enable it by providing resources.
just to
Even a
clarify,
child. Yeah,
sorry,
hi,
just to
go on.
clarify that, like, can you provoke it? Like, just give the resources and then see. I mean, if you're not sure what schemas they have, like, just provide resources and see what they do. See if they if a child has that schemas in them, or it has to just be natural, finding their own resources and just bringing up the schemas naturally, or can you really enhance? I don't know the word. Like, can you provoke it? Can you bring it out of them?
This is a really good question. I would say in normal circumstances, a child will work through their own cognitive development. But as Lorna was just saying, let's imagine we don't know about schemas. Let's imagine schemas don't even exist. What we would normally be doing is providing a range of resources and experiences that support where they are now and gradually move them on a tiny little bit. And it's the same for schemas as it is for just regular development. So I would say, yes, by all means, provide resources. Don't worry if they're not displaying a schema. They're still using those resources, aren't they, in their own way? But I think it all comes down to knowing your children really well and recognizing where the development is and how you can support it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. Can I ask, why would you want to kickstart a schema?
So if you think you
expect that, oh, I expect that this match sticks. This child should be doing X, Y, and Z, and just staring at it and not really showing any schemas with it. If you can maybe just role model and see what they can do, or if at all they're not even going to be interested in it. But if I just think if it's role modeled, then they can think, oh yeah, I can do it that way, or I can do it my own way, or I can.
You can definitely role model or scaffold anything really. I don't think it. I could be wrong. I don't think you. Thank you, Julia. I don't think you would be able to kickstart a schema. Do you, Lisa? But I do think that would still support children's development, even if it wasn't a schema. And also, schemas can be very subtle. So don't worry if you can't see it as a big thing.
I don't think kickstarting it, because actually you're building on schemas that, like you say, children use it, building on what their brain needs. We can't decide that. We can't see. We can't see what it is that those children need to learn. That's why following children's interests in their play and taking the learning to them that way is so much more beneficial, because we can't see developmentally or how they are cognitively developed. You know what I mean? I wouldn't say you'd be able to kickstart a schema. You might be able to put out resources that lean towards a schema, but I'm not sure what you would gain from that.
Yeah.
Like I say, like Kim said, by putting out like lots of different loose parts, you're almost offering them that provision that if there is something there, that they can have that repetitive behaviour with things like loose parts, and I just think it's a naturally occurring.
Okay. I think you're right. Yeah, I think Lisa's right. Their brain is telling them, I need information about this, go and get it. But because it can be very subtle, these children, a child that you might see that you think, why hasn't this child got a schema? They might already have that information in their head. Like Lisa, their brain might already have that and not need it anymore. And also it might just be that they don't need to exhibit a schema in such a big.
They learn in different ways, don't they? The schematic plays that, is children building on that repetition. Some children don't need to learn in that way, in the same way that some children learn to read in a different way to others. I think that's why you might not see the schematic behaviour as much in every child, because, like Kim says, it's subtle, but it's probably because they don't need to learn in that way. Whereas those children that have like that really strong schematic behaviour, they need to learn. That's how they're going to learn, and they'll probably learn by lots of different things through repetition. As they move on.
What I would say is, don't worry about it. Don't worry that this child hasn't exhibited a schema. As long as you're supporting their development, that's the main thing. Also, so I'll give you a quick example. Sorry, we're going over. Is that all right, Damon? Yeah. I'll give a quick example. I've got a child in my setting at the moment who, I think I used her on the last thing we were doing, paints everything, paints like ornaments, paints anything, absolutely anything. She wants to paint it. Well, I know that's an enclosing schema, an enveloping schema, because she wants to cover something in paint. But it's quite subtle, even though she wants to paint a lot. If someone else came in who was perhaps not experienced with early years and looked at her, they'd just see a child doing painting on an egg box or painting on an ornament. They wouldn't realise what it was, It's only because I know that's her schema and I've watched it emerge that I'm able to provide the resources that she needs. And the resources that she needs are a thing of watercolour paints that I've just run under the tap, so it's always wet for her. And she chooses stuff from around the room, lines it up, paints it. And then sometimes she wants to wash it off and then start again. So that's a transforming. So, these things are overlapping, but it's still very subtle. And as I say, if someone else came in that wasn't from early years, wasn't one of you, you just see a child doing some painting, thinking, oh, that's interesting. She's painting a doll, and then she's gone to wash the doll in the bathroom, and then she comes back and paints it again a different color. So it's really not. It might be that child that you think hasn't got a schema has already had the schema, or it's a very subtle schema, and they're not. It's just not exhibiting in a massive, dramatic way.
It's like another one like that is that children like to put things inside Play-Doh. So if they like putting objects inside them and covering them up. And we've got a child in one of our settings that he's a preschool boy, he likes to do that, but you also see that schema coming out in other areas of his play, like he's constantly wraps himself up in big pieces of material and things like that. So that enveloping schema goes through quite a lot of aspects of his play. But again, it's almost, are they coming out of that schematic behaviour? Because they do just kind of stop